Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And today we're so fortunate to be joined by James Sweeney, who is the writer, director, and star of the movie Straight Up. And this is a film that you've been working on for such a long time. You've been writing the script since 2013 and initially made a proof of concept in 2015. And I was really curious about how making that proof of concept piece really helped in just figuring out some of the elements of the DNA of what eventually became the feature version of this for you.
Yeah, wow, you did your research. Thank you. A proof of concept is that it's establishing the style and the tone. When we made it, we were hoping that the production company that we made it with would then finance the whole feature length version of the film. At the time, their whole paradigm was casting influencers, of which I am not, and neither were the actors that we cast in the short, really. So we ended up parting ways creatively, but obviously I was still very passionate about the story and trying to find a way to get it made. But in terms of how that informed the feature, I mean, I think it sort of solidified a lot of the aesthetic choices I wanted to make, both visually and the banter, and sort of realizing what did and didn't work, like in terms of the way you edit it and the way you frame it. I think I learned a lot about what I wanted to bring from the short into the feature, and maybe the parts that I wanted to heighten or elevate to an extent.
Right. And you were mentioning the dialogue there, and that's one of the elements of the film that people have been so receptive to and really connected to. And you give such a monumental amount of detail in every single line throughout the film. And because you come from a playwriting background, which is obviously more dialogue driven generally, I was interested in how that really led into this being a very dialogue driven film, and the fact that it isn't just a case of having characters say something rather than showing us, it's really embellishing and adding to the detail in every single moment.
Yeah. I mean, the dialogue is kind of a character in itself in the film. And, if you had read the script, because I don't write a ton of stage directions, which is probably, again, from having written plays before I started writing scripts or screenplays, is that it would read very much like a stage play. So maybe a lot of the visual flourishes I had in mind for the film wouldn't necessarily read on the page. But I think there are a lot of films, especially if you look at like the old screwball comedies, that because you don't want to miss the dialogue, one, because they're speaking so fast, but two, because it is propelling the story forward, they did a lot of interesting things. I mean, one is you just let it sit on the actors. You can't like cut away from two people who are like playing tennis from each other. You want to see the action. And when the action is the dialogue, that's really important. So I think that informed a lot of how we decided to shoot it as well.
Yeah, and you've talked a little bit about how much of the dynamic of that banter came from working with Katie Finley, who plays the other co-lead in the film, Rory, and the rhythm that the two of you just naturally had with each other. But you also shift the pacing of the dialogue a lot in a really interesting way, where when they first meet and they're getting to know each other, it's a lot of comedic back and forth, and then when there's some of the more serious intimate moments in the middle of the film, you almost slow it down a little bit. Was that a conscious choice where you were thinking about the specific pacing and how it related to the story in those moments?
Yes, it's both intentional, but also not super pre-planned. Like I wasn't mapping it out and go, oh, we've been having too many like fast-paced dialogues in a row, and now we need to slow it down. I think it's a little bit more instinctual than that. I think there is sort of the natural inclination to want to counterbalance sort of like high spritz, like frenetic pace, whatever, with something that has a little bit of relief to it. And some of that is found in the editing room. Not a ton of it, because again, there's only so much coverage in the film. So there's only so much we could do in the edit bay. But I do think that, when I'm looking at the story, and I am looking for, I guess, moments uh, of silence that are going to be where I can place them that they'll be the most impactful, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. And in casting Katie, you know, it sounds like she really intrinsically connected to the material and really understood what you wanted to say through the film, and particularly when it came to conversations around sexual identity and mental health. And you've mentioned how she really asked a lot of the right questions when you first met with her and started discussing the character. And so I wanted to ask you about what were those questions and the types of things that it was that she was asking about that made you see that instant connection to the material and the story that you wanted to tell.
Hmm. You know, sorry, it was so long ago. I do remember that she, one, wanted to make sure, because it reads on the script, and I think she had faith in the material, but also wanted to be sure that I had pure intentions, I guess, because you're dealing with a concept that deals with a lot of serious topics, from mental health to sexuality struggles. And she wanted to know that it was somebody who was of the community that was going to handle these things with tenderness and shrewdness, and that it wasn't just like, here's a gay guy who starts dating a woman and that's what everyone should do, because that could not have gone over quite as well. But she also asked just interesting questions about the character, and it was a back and forth really about talking about even like Rory's sexual trauma and what Katie thought about that. So I think that starting off the foot with that, it just made me feel like she was somebody who I could really partner with and was going to respect the material, but also, you know, over the life of the film, not just on set, was going to be proud of this, and felt like she had something to say as well.
And you had a little bit of an opportunity to spend time together before filming, but not an extensive amount of time. And it sounds like you really used a lot of that time to focus more on building out the trust in your dynamic together than necessarily needing to workshop a lot of scenes. And so what were some of the things that the two of you did, or the types of conversations that you wanted to have together to really build that foundation, so that when you were on set, that you could just dive straight into thinking about character and emotional arcs within scenes?
Right. Yeah, because some people might see the film and think that Katie and I knew each other beforehand, which we did not. It was just a traditional casting process. But in order to build that chemistry and to have it feel natural, for people outside of the film industry, you know, being on set and like starting like a very, what is an intimate relationship, and making that out of nothing, it's really hard. And for me, being a first time actor, writer, director, it's a lot of faith to put stock in. And I just wanted to make sure that she and I were as comfortable as possible with each other going into the film, understanding that we had limited bandwidth in terms of time and resources, especially since she was in Vancouver and I was in LA. So it's not the kind of thing where she could just like come over every week before we were filming, because we were in different places. So I think, you know, the first time I saw her, we went to get brunch, and it was this sort of weird thing because, you know, we had spoken and she was cast in the role, but this was like the first time where like, oh, I'm going to touch you now. You know, it is just about, I guess, trying to start a friendship, if that makes sense, and hoping that translates to the film itself. Not that you have to be friends with everybody that you work with, but I felt like the fact that Katie and I are good friends now really benefited the film and colored the chemistry and really sort of streamlined the way that we were able to communicate as actor and director and actor to actor on set.
And you're mentioning the faith that she had to have in you as a first-time filmmaker and actor in the film. But at the same time, that transcends behind the camera as well. Often it's like you want to make sure that you're building up a crew of people who really believe in you and believe in the project and the story that they're telling, particularly when you're telling it under such constraints as this, where you filmed it in 18 days across 20 locations, which is an incredible feat. So when you were finding crew, did you find yourself at all specifically looking and having conversations with people who are potentially coming on as collaborators, not just about, can you do this job? Do you want to do this job? But kind of really feeling out if there was that connection to the story as well?
Yeah, great question. was very much intent on trying to have a built-in sort of family unit feel. And I think making a super micro budget film is sort of selective, self-selective in that way, where the people who end up being on set are the people who want to be there. Otherwise, they could go do something that pays better. You know, Greg, my DP, I met him during my freshman storytelling class in college, and we've been shooting together pretty much ever since then. And with him comes the Greg crew, who are also many people that I do know and maybe have worked with on shorts or just know incidentally. But, you know, there were a lot of roles that I didn't have a go-to person, and I had to fill that out with either friends of friends or just, you know, sort of putting out the feelers to find who was, one, available, and two, interested in it. And I think we really attracted the best kind of people. It did eliminate people. Like, I would meet some line producers like, yeah, I don't do this budget anymore, but good luck. But I think the people who maybe really resonated with the material were the people who were overlooking the rate and be like, yeah, I think this is an important story, and you seem nice, I'm nice, let's do this. That was really something that was important to us. Just everyone be very nice. Because you know, you don't have like fresh, like lovely crafty all the time. I mean, we do what we can. I think feeding your crew is super important to morale. But you know, it's just it's a no fringe type of feel. And I think, you know, when you treat everyone well, then they look forward to showing up, and they're on time, and things move faster. And it just, I don't know. I hope to carry that on to every set in the future, regardless of the budget size.
I also was really interested in the fact that part of your location scouting was actually through processes like Airbnb and using that as a really great tool and resource. So how did that look in terms of finding and securing locations through Airbnb and potential conversations that you then had with property managers, or did you just secretly film in Airbnbs without them knowing?
Yeah, Airbnb, I wouldn't say is the best way to go about finding places. Part of it is just that, again, limited budget. So we were looking for locations that were as set dressed as possible already, and then we could just add what we needed, because we would only have limited time per location. Because again, as you said, 20 locations in 18 days, which requires, one, a few location moves, but two, if you're at a new place every day, it's just really hard to with the as specific as aesthetic as we had in mind, to create something if we're creating it from scratch. I think the only location that we were at for multiple days was Todd's apartment in which Rory moved in, which was, you know, the scene with the kitchen fight about irony and a lot of the bedroom stuff. That was one place. So we were actually there for 4 days, but everything else was 1 day or less. So in terms of reaching out, yeah, you just, it's a little bit like throwing things against the wall and then seeing what sticks. Yeah, so most people say no, but that's the worst that they can do. Say no, you ask politely. And I don't, you know, we had permitted everything. Everything was by the books. Everybody was on payroll. Like, we didn't want to risk, because if you do get shut down with, again, you don't have the resources, like then your whole production is screwed and you can't make that back up. So it's just kind of looking for miracles under whatever rock you can find them.
Did you were mentioning the overall aesthetic of the film, and it has such a clear and distinctive and cohesive look, even with all those locations. But did you find that you allowed certain aspects of the locations to really dictate what some of the visual stylistic choices and scenes were going to be? Because I'm thinking about, there's that one location where you've got that beautiful floral wallpaper in the background, or there's another scene where the two of you are laying on a rug with like very diametric lines, or the sun loungers that they're sitting in front of like things hanging over the fencing. And so there's a lot of very specific kind of like corners that you managed to find within these locations, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely think that the shot selection was very much based off of location, even like deciding whether or not it was going to be done as a oneer or like multiple sections. Is very much, I think, influenced by what my eye sees and where I think is an interesting shot and what it's going to add to the story and what does it say, to do a whip pan versus, you know, just a long oneer. So that was also like the deciding factor when we were figuring out these locations, because the locations are kind of a character in the film as well. And I think say a lot about, you know, because these are two characters who are playing house in more ways than one. And I would see a location, and yeah, I think that's kind of just how I informed. We didn't have time to do tech scouts. So I got pretty lucky that most of the places that I scouted just to visit were the places that we ended up using. And then we would just take pictures, and that was kind of our storyboarding. I've done like short films before where I storyboard the whole film, but for this one, it was nice to just sort of like have an idea of the direction that we were going to shoot and then be able to light it once we were on set. Sorry, I don't know if that's like technical stuff, but
no, it's really fascinating. And you touched on this a little bit before in talking about the coverage, and there are a lot of scenes, particularly within these locations, where you have a singular camera set up for an entire scene and you're not necessarily grabbing a lot of coverage, which I imagine also actually helped with moving really fast. And did you find that by doing less coverage and really having those singular shots, that allowed you to focus on the content and the dynamic of those scenes in a really different way together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think it was my first AC who said that we were shooting like 2 or 3 times as much as another film would have, just in terms of like actual footage, because he was the one who was transcoding it. And I think that's because I just was doing a lot of takes, and because there was limited setups, we were able to just really focus on the performances. And because again, the script is like 90% dialogue, I think that was really important. So we could just, and that was a nice thing for me as somebody who was also the director and actor. It's sort of, I didn't feel rushed. And I think we rarely had a day where we went over 12 hours, because I wanted sleep. And again, it's a crew working for not a lot of money. So 1, I don't think we could afford overtime, but 2, even if we had asked for that, you know, I just wanted to keep it like a healthy pace. And sort of, you know, that's not to say that there weren't times that were frenetic on set. What used to happen was the first half of the day would be a much more, I don't want to say glacial, but it always seemed like we were cramming everything in the last like 2 hours of the day. I remember the day that we shot the scene in Monterey with the "Baby If You Love Me" scene where they're on the couch, which we did have to wait for that because it's night and you need it to match. But we had a hard out at that location, so we had to be out of there at a certain time. Let's say it was 9 p.m. And we shot the wide of Katie and I, but then we had to do both of our close-ups individually. And we had 45 minutes to shoot both of our coverage for the close-up. And my first AD is like, "Oh, we're not gonna make it." And even in my head, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen?" The film, what I like in my mind. But then Katie, so one trick that we learned was just to do rolling takes. So she would do one take and then go, "Let's go again," but never cut. So she did 3 perfect takes in a row without cutting. And then we switched it around in like 5 minutes, and then we got my coverage. That's more of an extreme of what we did, but it did happen on a few other days as well.
On the other side of things, it sounds like you had around 8 hours when you were actually filming the argument about the Alanis Morissette song, ironic with that scene. Was it always the intention with that scene, especially with the camera work in that, to really slow down the pacing and spend a lot more time on that particular scene?
Well, it's just a technically challenging scene. And again, going back to you have the location, then you just sort of have to figure out how to make it work.
Mhm.
And we didn't have time to rehearse in the space beforehand. So really the shooting was our rehearsal. So if you had looked at take one versus what ended up being in the film, there's a lot of difference. Like there weren't initially all the whip pans. It was something that we sort of had an idea for, but then we sort of figured it out. Or even some of the blocking where you have the whip pan and it's Rory's reaction in close up, and then you whip back to me, and then you whip back to her, and then she's all the way in the background putting away the glasses. That was just sort of an idea for infusing some physical comedy that was learned through just trying it over and over again. And there were a lot of mess ups because it's such a verbally aerobic scene where we're just saying things a mile a minute. I thought it was only like, I want to say like 20 or 30 takes because that's how many number of takes there were. But again, because we would stop and start or do rolling takes within a scene, I think we probably did that scene like 60 times. So it was a lot. And I don't think I've ever spoken so much in one day in my life, except for maybe the scene or the day we shot all the therapy scenes, because that was all one day. And that's just a lot of monologues.
And, beyond the fact that you have the cultural reference and that discourse around an Alanis Morissette song, there's other pop culture references littered throughout the film, whether it's Cat on a Hot Tin Roof or reference to the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin. But I thought it was so clever that all of the pop culture references that you make are all things which have been in the zeitgeist for a certain amount of time. So it's nothing where if you watch this movie a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that it's going to actually date the film in any way. And so I was actually really interested if that was something that you consciously thought about when you were writing a lot of those references into the script.
Interesting. I do think I try to refrain from things that I feel like are super trendy or won't stand the test of time. It's hard to say that there's an exact litmus test for this, because something that I think is meaningful to me or funny to me won't necessarily like click someone else's box. So I think there are a lot of pop culture allusions in this film that are just going to go over somebody's head. But hopefully the idea is that it doesn't really matter. You still get the gist of it, or there's another joke coming that is for you. So we try to not make the characters, the comedies and all the references feel exclusionary. But at the same time, we did try to pick things that, I think are things that enough people, like there were maybe a couple ideas that I had that's just too niche and nobody's going to get that. But then I think there are some things in there like Halloween Town. Like how many people have seen that movie? I don't know. Maybe it's a generational thing.
One of the other scenes that I wanted to talk about was the scene where Todd's with his parents and they're meeting Rory for the first time, because you have Betsy Brandt and Randall Park playing your parents, and particularly with the stylistic way in which you were filming this a little bit differently and thinking about coverage. I heard that you actually filmed yours and Katie's coverage first so that the two of them could get a sense of how you were approaching the scenes and what you were doing with the camera. At what point did you realize that that was going to be a really beneficial thing for you to do for them to be able to just sit back and see the scope of how you were putting this film together?
I mean, it wasn't like decided in advance. It was really decided on the day. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if it was like a lighting issue. Thankfully, it didn't super matter whose coverage we shot first. And we shot my coverage first because the lighting was really nice right then. And there were like these in certain takes, because it's not all the same take, but you can see like leaves falling in the window. I'm like, oh my God, it's like stunning. I wish I'd done it like for all of my coverage, but you can't control the leaves. But then I did feel like, going to me and then to Katie would give Randall and Betsy a little bit more time to ingest the material and sort of get clued. I mean, they're both the most pro people you could ask for. But I think it just, it's helpful for an actor to sort of ease into the groove. And why not? Why not lead by example?
And then once you had wrapped making the film, there's something that you've mentioned that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I think it's a conversation that's very rarely had, in that, it was a little bit of a struggle after you'd wrapped the film, and kind of processing the emotional come down of something that you'd been working on for so many years. And, I think for any project like this, where essentially it's a high adrenaline experience, and also the sense of community that really comes together. And then all of a sudden you go from these 12-hour days to just everything's at a standstill. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit about the journey of what those days were like after you wrapped, and those feelings, and kind of just pushing through that as a creative.
Yeah, such a deep question. You know, I think it was hard for me because I was so involved with the editing process, and was struggling with my own insecurities of having made something that was very, very different, and having to look at my face all the time, which is not something that I enjoy. And feeling like, because the film as itself was really made in a vacuum. Sure, there are some recognizable people in it, but this was something that, didn't go through any of the traditional like establishment labs or anything like this. It was really very much the truest form of an indie film. And our producers hadn't made a feature film before, minus Ross, but so it felt very much like this was a film that nobody necessarily was asking for. And I think that really made me question whether or not it was going to find an audience. So God bless my editor for having to deal with all of my anxiousness throughout that process. But yeah, in terms of, I guess, like the postpartum from having wrapped a film, the nice thing of when we wrapped Principal was that I went directly from that to 2 days later premiering an anthology film that I had worked on, where I directed like 1/6 of it at the Mill Valley Film Festival. So I got to go straight from wrapping to a premiere. And then I still had to look forward to when we were doing the pickups, because we had wrapped in October and then we had the pickups in January. But at that point, honestly, we were still casting the parents. We hadn't locked in either Randall or Betsy yet for those roles. So in a way, part of me was like, I still have to get the rest of the crew back together, the money for the pickups, and who we're going to cast, and find the location. So there was still a lot of work to be done between the Principal and the pickups. But then even after the pickups, yeah, I think, I mean, I could do a whole interview about the distribution process, but that process was, I think, really the part I struggled with the most, because it's really hard for an independent film to get a distributor who's going to pay attention to it. We got very lucky that Strand Releasing came on after we premiered at the Frameline Film Festival in San Francisco. But yeah, I mean, I wrote an essay about it for Talk House, that I sort of go into the depression that I went through with that, particularly the aspect ratio. There was a lot of issues with people not thinking that a film could be distributed in 4:3. And so, yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about that.
Well, with that conversation, because you had another distributor who was interested in the film, and they wanted a different aspect ratio. But I wanted to ask about like the steadfastness that you've had at every single step of the journey with this film, whether it's the fact that, you could have made the film a little bit sooner, but it wouldn't have been on your parameters. And then even the distribution, because, changing the aspect ratio of a film isn't just shifting something on screen, that's removing part of the framing and part of the visual aesthetic that you've created, from scratch. And so was there ever a struggle where you questioned whether you should give in to certain choices or things that people wanted of the film? Or did you just always have such a clear vision of exactly what it was that you were trying to tell with this story, that it was easy to hold on to that vision, even though it meant sometimes saying no to certain opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, the career of filmmaking is always compromise. I mean, just the process of collaboration. Hopefully they're all compromises that you're happy with, but not always. So it is very much about picking and choosing your battles. I mean, in terms of making other potential opportunities I had to make straight up, yes, they were compromises that wasn't willing to make, because it was also like being made for no money. So it's like, well, if I'm not getting paid and I'm not getting to make the film that I want to make, then why am I doing this? But, I think I also have to recognize that, the ability to make a film, which is unlike other art forms, something that involves so many people and so many resources, it is a privilege. And so when I had initially decided to figure out a way to share the film and excise the 4:3, it was really just a way of making other people happy, even though I knew it was going to kill my soul. But thankfully it all worked out, and hopefully I won't have to go through that specific pain again. But I do think that just it's the nature of this business. It's art meets commerce, and it's trying to find, where you're going to put your foot down. And hopefully, I think what I've really learned is to just try to surround myself with people who from the offset have the same passion and vision. And I think any like aspiring filmmaker, that's the best thing that you can do for yourself to save the headaches from down the road is to make sure that you have people fighting in your corner from the offset.
Yeah. Well, I think the final version of the film is such a testament to the vision that you had throughout. And it's a really fantastic film. And I hope that everybody who's tuned in for this Q&A will check out the film. It's been released by Strand, but is also available to watch on Netflix. And thank you so much for this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you.